Morning. Well, I'm going to warn you right off the bat that this message is a real thinker. So it's going to require some critical thinking skills to make it through this message on your part. Now, I also empathize and understand that for some of you, today is just not your day for thinking, all right? And you'd rather not think at all. So I invite you, in fact, I encourage you, if that's the case, just go ahead, lean back, close your eyes, take a little nap. It'll all be over in about 20 minutes, and we'll catch you then, okay? Keep in mind, and I really do get that while you only ever have to listen to this message once, I sometimes rehearse these like 20, 25 times. So I've heard this message quite a bit. So if you feel like sometimes I might drone on and on and on, you better believe on Friday night when I'm practicing this message at 10:30 at night in the middle of a bean field under the stars, I'm like, I am so sick and tired of hearing this guy talk. Would he just stop? All right, so I get it. I really do. All right. The apostles say to Jesus, increase our faith. And Jesus said, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a tree. And he's driving at the point he's driving at here is that the validity of our faith is not based on the quantity of it. The validity of our faith is based on what are we placing our faith in. It doesn't matter if you have a tiny little bit of faith or if you have a lot of faith, so long as what you're placing that faith in, the object of your faith, is correct. And here we go. This is the warm-up. This is the softball. This shouldn't require a lot of thinking here. What is the object of our faith? Jesus Christ, right? That's the easy one. And for many of you, like, can we just end it there? We just stop and we're done, okay? But no, we're going to expand upon that, okay? We're going to go farther than that. We are correct in saying that Jesus Christ is the object of our faith. That is the only object of our faith. That's the centerpiece of our faith. But we have to be careful because if all we say is Jesus Christ, there's a lot of aspects to our faith life. And those aspects all have Jesus at the center of them, but all those little aspects of our faith life require that we put our faith in them. And historically, some of you remember back in the 60s and 70s, there was the Jesus movement. And they attempted, it was sort of run by, let's say it was like the countercultural movement was running this. And the idea here was that we could strip everything away from the Bible, the Old Testament, Paul's epistles, all that, and just leave it with the Gospels and what Jesus said, and that's all you needed. And it sort of turned this thing we call faith into a personality cult. All they had was Jesus. There's a lot to our faith. Jesus is at the center of that faith. God is always at the center of our faith. But connected to that is some other things. So what am I talking about here? Well, think about prayer. Prayer is inherently connected to Jesus. At the center of prayer is God, but prayer does require us to put faith in it. In order for it to be powerful and work in our life, we have to put faith in prayer. Church, that imperfect human institution called church. Well, it does require that we put faith in St. Luke, right? And at the center of St. Luke is Jesus Christ. But we have to put faith in that. Think about the sacraments, communion, baptism, marriage. They all require that you put faith in them. And at the center of all those sacraments is what? Jesus Christ, okay? Even down to, say, your discipleship, your evangelism, even that little grace you say before your meal requires that you put your faith in that. And that all has what at the center of it? God, okay? So that's what we're putting our faith in. And I thought, well, how do you describe that? We're expanding this of what we're putting our faith into. How would we describe that? Well, the word that jumped to my mind was we could call it the faith system. And as soon as I said that, I thought, oh, I really dislike that word system because it seems in 2025, everything is a system these days. There's the multimedia system, there's the electronic system, the computer system, the copier fax printing system, the checkout system, the tax system, the political system, the public school system. Everything's a system. It's so artificial and matrix-like. The other week, I broke the shop vac. I had to go buy a new shop vac on Amazon. So I jumped on Amazon, I typed in shop vac, and I learned that they're no longer called shop vacs. They're called debris recovery systems. DRS. We used to have one word for this stuff called vacuum. Now we make it into 3 words in an acronym. So everything's a system. I refuse to make our personal faith lives a system. That is so artificial. So I'm going to borrow really what is an older term, although it seems very simple. I like the word story. Your faith life as a story. And that story has at the center of it Jesus and includes all those aspects of faith in your life. Prayer, discipleship, church, sacraments, everything that you're putting your faith in. And we as Christians, we're putting our faith in our faith stories, with at the center of every single faith story being Jesus Christ as Christians. And if you think about it, we go around as Christians, we tell stories to each other. We are storytellers. Christianity, if you think of it like a house, it's a house made of bricks, and each brick is an individual story. The keystone being this book, the Bible, a collection of stories, faith stories, people's lives and interactions with God. This is the keystone in the house. And then each of you has a story to contribute to that house. Each of you has a brick that you're placing on that house, and that's how we're building this thing we call Christianity, a collection of stories. We tell each other stories, and then we ask that each of us place our faith in their stories, right? Just like we place our faith in these stories, which have God at the center of it. I have to place my faith in your story just like you're asked to place your faith in my story. And you place your faith in my story because you know that Jesus is at the center of it. That's why you put your faith in it. And that's how we're building this house we call Christianity. Part of the stream of stories that Christianity is. And guess what? For thousands of years yet to come, people will tell stories of their faith lives, and we will continue to build that house. So that's what we're putting our faith in, story, a faith story. Now, when I say the word story, I can tell some of you are like, story, because in the English language, sometimes we think of the story as being fantasy or make-believe, right? Not factual. What type of story is a faith story? Your faith story. If you had to write out your faith story, where would you put it in the library? And what you quickly realize if you do this thought exercise, it doesn't really fit into any category because it includes so much. It includes history, biography, religion, everyday life. It just includes all sorts of things. There's probably even some cooking in there too, okay? It's part of your faith story. It might even belong in the cooking section. There's so much in these faith stories. And so what you realize is you can't easily categorize a faith story, just like you can't easily categorize where you would put the Holy Bible in the library. It doesn't fit any known category, any known genre. And this is the thinking part. Our faith stories are neither facts or fictions. They're a whole separate category. Here we go. We got to think about this. And the category is called truth. True. They are true stories. Now, remember, we're thinking about this, okay? For a lot of us, the impulse is to believe that truth and fact are synonymous, right? If I say true, that also means factual. But truth is different. It's a whole nother category. It's above fact or fiction, all right? Why? Truth, unlike facts or fictions, tells us who we are, where we came from, and what comes next. Truth is always relevant to our life, meaningful to our life, and it's never misleading. It's never subject to our interpretations. So that's why we can place our faith in our stories of truth. Our faith stories, the stories we find in the Bible, are all true stories because they are relevant, meaningful to our life, and they're never misleading. At the center of them is God. Did you ever hear in the Gospel of John how he starts it off? He doesn't start it off in a manger in Bethlehem. He says, the Word was God. The Word was God. And the Word became flesh. And that Word was filled with grace and truth. And Jesus says to us, I am the way, the truth, and the light. So Jesus is the truth. Our faith stories are truth. God is at the center of those faith stories. What are we placing our faith in? The truth, which is God. Now, truth, Jesus, is meaningful, relevant to our life, and never subject to interpretation. Why do I not call that factual? Why would John not have said Jesus was fact? Well, facts are a little different, and we're going to examine that. Here's the problem with facts. facts can be rather not relevant to your life. Facts can actually be rather meaningless, and facts are subject to interpretation. For instance, we'll start with the first one, why facts are not relevant to your life. I had a breakfast this morning, like many of you. It consisted of 2 yogurts. It's a fact. It happened. But while this is a fact, I would say it's not a very profound fact. It has 0 relevance to your life. Even though it happened, it is not relevant to your life. Historians, history is filled with facts. And it pains me to say this, right, because I love history, okay? I imagine myself as an amateur historian sometimes, okay? Facts in history can oftentimes be meaningless in our life. The Battle of Gettysburg occurred between July 1st and July 3rd, 1863. That's a fact. It happened. And yet, again, pains me to say this, you could be very happy and content and successful in 2025 America and never know that fact. It's not meaningful. And facts can be misleading. Ask any cop. Say there's a shoplifting event, and he finds there's 3 witnesses, and he goes up and asks each witness what they saw. And the first guy says, well, I saw a guy running out of the store wearing a red shirt. And the second guy says, well, I saw the guy running out of the store, he was wearing a salmon-colored shirt. And the third guy says, well, I'm colorblind, and the guy running out of the store was wearing a gray shirt. Who's right? They're all right. They are all telling you the facts. That's not opinions. They're telling you their interpretations of the event. They're all facts. So facts can be misleading. The classic biblical example of this in the Gospels is Matthew, Mark, and John all say that Jesus gave the sermon on the what? The mountain. But good old Luke, he says it was the sermon on the plain. Who's right? They're all right. They all viewed that event differently. They're all telling you the facts. So why would we as Christians who are asked to place our faith in these things we call stories, with God at the center of it, want to put our faith in a story that is not relevant to my life, not meaningful to my life, and could be potentially misleading and subject to interpretation? You want to place your faith in the story of truth, which has God and Jesus Christ, who is the universal truth, at the center of it. There is only one truth. There's not different versions of the truth. There is only one. There's only God. That is the truth. Let's think about the parables. Perfect example of truth. Now, the parables are interesting because there's no prior example of a parable in Jewish literature prior to Jesus. So most people believe that this is an original creation of Jesus, and he used these to teach. But the parables actually include, in some cases, Jewish folklore stories. So obviously when Jesus was growing up, he heard stories that people would tell, just like we tell folk tales. And so some of the parables include those folk tales in them, and then Jesus combined it with his real-world experiences. So it has the parables are an amalgamation of a lot of different things. But what do parables do for us? They're very meaningful in our life. They're very relevant, and they are never subject to drastic interpretations. Ask any Christian missionary. You can take the parable and read it to a culture or people who have no prior experience with Jesus or Christianity, and they get the same meaning, the same overall meaning that you do even after sitting in the pew for 50 years. That's truth. That's universal truth. That's what we want to place our faith in. Truth will always unite us. The truth, which is Jesus, always brings us together. And yet, how often as Christians, as believers, do we exist at what I call sort of this bottom feeder level, right? And we debate and come into conflict with each other over our faith stories. We turn it into a slugfest of fact versus fiction. I don't know if I can believe in that. I think that's factual. I don't think that's accurate. We slug it out. And when we do that, we think, oh, well, that will make me believe more. That's what the apostles were saying. Somehow prove this to me. Make me believe it more. Jesus is saying, if you just put your faith in me, the truth, it doesn't matter how much your faith is, how big it is. Always place your faith in the truth. Good way to think about this is, I like to say, this is an old cliche, the devil's in the details. The devil's in the details. And when we want to fight over little details, little facts, oh, well, this is symbolism, this isn't symbolism. When we're doing that type of fight, what are we? We're in conflict with each other. We're in conflict with each other. We're fighting each other. We're splitting churches because of those debates. Oh, well, that's not factual. Oh, they said that was symbolism. It's definitely not symbolism. Look, we're in conflict. We're not united by the truth. We're falling apart. We're fighting each other. And I think of we'll use the example of the Sermon on the Mountain or the Sermon on the Plain. To me, it doesn't seem to matter where the geographic location Jesus gave that sermon on is. But to some people, it matters. And they've killed a lot of trees and spilled a lot of ink writing large theological essays to prove their point. And I think they spend all this time and we're fighting each other over, oh, it was on a mountain, or no, it was on a plain. And what's the truth? Jesus is over there delivering the greatest sermon ever delivered in the history of humans. And he's saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Turn the other cheek. Listen to the truth. Cooperate with each other. Be compassionate to each other. Work with each other. And meanwhile, we're fighting each other over a mountain. If we would just place our faith in what Jesus said, who is the truth, we could probably move the mountain that we're fighting over. How foolish can we be? How foolish can we be? Always place your faith in the truth. If you place your faith in the truth, which is Jesus, you will be united as one body in Christ. It always works. There's only one truth. If you place your faith in each other's faith stories, and if those faith stories have Christ in them, you will be united together. They are true. They are real. It's truth, guys. It's neither facts or fictions. It's truth. I'll leave you with this final story as I wrap this up. I think it does a good job of, no pun intended, illustrating this. But there was an artist several years back in New York City, and he painted two large canvases, and both of them were of, quote-unquote, a nativity scene. All right, the first painting is of the manger, okay, and all it includes is a bed of straw and the baby Jesus lying in the bed of straw. So it doesn't include anything else from the Christmas story. So it doesn't include Mary and Joseph, the animals, the shepherds, on and on and on. Just has Jesus in it. And he hangs it up in the art gallery. It says, the birth of Christ. The second painting he paints has everything in it that you know and love from the Christmas story. So Mary, Joseph, the animals, the shepherds, the star, the wise men, even though the wise men weren't technically there on that night, right? Includes all those things that you would see in a nativity scene. But it leaves the crucial ingredient out. Jesus Christ, the baby. He hangs them up side by side. People walk into the gallery. Now he titles both of them the birth of Jesus Christ. He doesn't tell anybody he's left the baby out of the one painting. People walk into the gallery and they look at the first painting, which is just of Jesus. And people look at that and they say, wait a minute, this isn't right. It's missing the facts. There has no Mary, there's no Joseph, there's no shepherds, there's no sheep. Where's the cow? Where's the cow? They're like, this is not an accurate depiction of the birth of Jesus Christ. Then they walk to the second painting, which has everybody else except Jesus. And it's something about pattern recognition in our brains that somehow if we see what we want to see, and if we see 95% of what we expect to see, even though it left out the number one ingredient, which is Jesus Christ, people just filled in the blank and they were like, oh, look, we like this one. They're like, look, it's got Mary, check, it's got Joseph, it's got the shepherds, it's got the angel, it's got the camel, the cow, it's got the donkey, the wise men, it's got it all. And people stood there and said, this is the accurate depiction of the birth of Jesus Christ. Talk about the emperor having no clothes. You guys remember that story? Talk about that. People stood and said, this is factual. This has historical context. This is historically accurate. This is how it was. It's missing the single most critical component in the whole story, which is the truth, which is the baby Jesus. And the painting that actually has the truth in it, everybody's ignoring. And everybody's saying that one's not right. Now, of course, when people realize this, you can understand that they wanted to burn that artist at the stake, okay? They were rather unhappy. But I think what he did was very revealing. It shows how we, as Christians and believers, want to put our faith in the facts, or we want to say this was symbolism, this is allegory, this is historically accurate, and therefore I can believe it because it's factual or it's historically accurate. And the problem is, there's only one thing that faith stories are. There's only one thing that the Christmas story is. That is, it is truth. It is true. And unless you're putting your faith in it as truth, well, everything else doesn't matter. And so I guess a good way to sort of sum this whole message up of whatever am I putting my faith in, even just a mustard seed of faith in, are you placing your faith in the truth? When you hear someone's faith story, are you placing your faith in that story, in the truth, in Jesus Christ? When you read Scripture, are you placing your faith in the truth? And as we approach, and we really are in the Christmas season now. I was at Home Depot up the other day, and they were putting up the Christmas trees. So let's face it, Christmas has begun. As we get in the Christmas season, you see nativity scenes, and you get all those millions of Christmas cards that have the nativity scene on it. Ask yourself, do my eyes go right to the baby Jesus? Do I look right? Do I look for the truth? Am I seeking the truth in that story? Is that the one thing I'm looking for? Because that's the only thing you should be looking for, and the only thing you should be putting your faith in. Am I looking for Jesus, for the truth? Or am I looking for the cow? Amen.